And I'll call the May 9th remote meeting of the Conference Committee on House File 4366, the Omnibus Agriculture, Housing, and Broadband to order. This remote meeting will be held in accordance with House Rule 10.01. And thank you everyone for attending today. We have a lot of important work ahead of us, and I'm honored to be part of this team in this effort. Senator Westrom and I have had some brief conversations about this bill. Looking forward to working with the Senator on this. From the House Ag perspective, I appreciate both the skills identified, a number of the same and we've identified some of the same priority areas of ag emergencies, livestock processing, and meat processing education, the Forever Green and Healthy Soil initiatives, ag innovation, and emerging farmers as well. The House also has a number of provisions the Senate does not have. I hope over the next couple of days we'll be able to convince you of their merits. While the House came in at 60 million above base and the Senate came in quite a bit lower, I'm hopeful we can follow past traditions and come to an agreement quite quickly and end up with something that is forward-looking and moves agriculture forward in Minnesota. Senator Westrom, please, do you have any comments before we begin?
Not too much, but Chair Sundin, thank you for that. Welcome to all our conferees and our committee members and staff. Appreciate us being able to get together and go through this. I look forward to kind of walking through the bills side by side. I think it'll be helpful. As mentioned, there are several more provisions in the House and the Senate, so we might need a little time to digest some more of that. There are, I think, some similar and common areas that both bills have touched on, maybe a little different ways. So we want to look at them closely as well. And keep in mind, this is our supplemental budget. Any years without a surplus, we probably wouldn't even be looking at doing a supplemental budget. So we want to be cautious to not get overcommitted as well, because good times are often followed by bad times, and we've all been through some of those ups and downs with the state budget. So we want to be careful as we move forward. And of course, there's some policies we need to look at, and what can we do to keep agriculture strong. And it's an important part of our economy, as about 20 or 25% of our state's economy is derived from agriculture or ag business. And so housing is also a big part, and they kind of go hand in hand, and that's becoming a more and more major problem across our state as housing supplies are shortage. Cost of housing building has gone up and up and up. And so I know we've got some of the conferees as chairs and those that have worked more actively on the housing committee stuff. So look forward to working together with everyone. And the Senate, of course, we had housing paired before this last biennium, and we'll probably want to break some of those issues off and kind of work, have different conference lead members take some of those issues. Chair Sundin, I'm thinking, as we once we get it through everything and everybody's kind of got a full picture here. So look forward to working together and trying to get resolution as quick as we can.
Terrific. Thank you, Senator. I'll defer to Representative Chair Hausman right now. She's chair of the Housing Committee. Alice Hausman, please. Comments?
Sorry, had to find that mute button. Mr. Chair, housing is a crisis. It is a crisis across the state, and that was demonstrated rather powerfully by a front page newspaper article. And I think it was in this morning's paper or yesterday morning's paper. I don't get the hard copies anymore. About the soaring number of evictions just since the ending of rent help MN. Just a staggering number. That means there are a lot of vulnerable people who are evicted from their current home and with already no no sufficient supply of affordable housing, there will be many more homeless people as a result. And that's the crisis we face. And I hope that that is always before us as we do our negotiations, and looking forward to those joint conversations.
Thank you, Chair Hausman. Next up, we have Senator Draheim. Would you like to offer any opening comments?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. I always love talking housing. Looking forward to robust discussion on housing and agriculture. And of course, we can't forget broadband. So I won't repeat what's already been said, but I'm excited and hopefully we can come together. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, members of the House and Senate nonpartisan staff, there will be walking us through the differences between the bills. Some of the staff have conflicts with other committees, so we'll be starting with the housing article and spreadsheet and then move on to the other areas. Before they begin, I'd like to thank them and the revisers staff for their work in getting these comparisons prepared. From a process perspective, if members have clarifying questions, I think we can break along the way, but if you want to get to the substance of an issue, it probably makes sense to hold on for future discussions. So please use the raise hand function and I'll recognize you. Okay, staff, whoever wants to start, please identify yourself for the record and take it away.
Chair Sundin, Chair Westrom. My name is Joe Harney, House Fiscal. I believe Ms. Conley will share her screen now to walk through the housing finance articles in both bills. To orient members of the conference committee as to what I'll be discussing, it'll be these first two major columns here, House File 4366, Article 3, Housing Appropriations. Beginning on line 10, the House position is a beginning appropriation of $20 million in fiscal year 22 and 23 for the Economic Development and Housing Challenge Program. That amount added to the base in the tails is $34,234,000. Moving down to line 14, there is an appropriation for deposit in the Housing Trust Fund at Minnesota Housing Finance. That $10 million is for the express purpose of providing rental assistance, and that $10 million is added to the base each fiscal year, totaling a $20 million base increase in the tails. Moving down to line 16 for Homework Starts with Home, the House position adds a $10 million appropriation in fiscal year 23 and a total of a $20 million added to the base in fiscal year 24 and 25. Moving to line 18, the Family Homeless Prevention Program, the House position increases this in 23 by 14 million and adds 20 million to the base in the tails. Moving to line 24, homeownership, education, counseling, and training. The House position is to add a one-time appropriation in fiscal year 23 of $1 million. Moving to line 29, there is another one-time appropriation for local housing trust fund grants. That amount is $7 million in fiscal year 23. Now moving to line 32, the House file creates a community stabilization program for improvements and maintenance to naturally occurring affordable housing. That's NOAA acronym. $100 million in the general fund is appropriated in fiscal year 23, and 40 million in each fiscal year thereafter is added to the base. On line 33, there is $5 million in fiscal year 23 for strengthening the supportive housing model, and that amount is added to the base in fiscal year 24 and 25. The next grouping here to tie everything out is all one-time appropriations. Line 34, there's a one-time appropriation for flexible financing for capital costs from the general fund. That amount is $5 million in fiscal year 23. On line 35, there is $2 million for the Lead Safe Homes program. That amount again is $1.2 million in fiscal year 23. On line 36, there is $425,000 for the mediation grant program in fiscal year 23. On line 37, there is $50 million from the general fund in fiscal year 23 for the first generation home buyer assistance program. And then there is $5,192,000 in fiscal year 23 on line 38 for manufactured home lending grants. To again tie everything out at the end here, there is a appropriation included in the House position to the Department of Human Rights for income discrimination investigations on line 42. That amount is $383,000 appropriated from the general fund to the Department of Human Rights in fiscal year 23, and that is added to the base each year thereafter. So Chair Sundin, Chair Westrom, to round out the House position in Article 3, there's a total of $230 million in fiscal year 22-23 appropriated from the general fund, and a total of $185 million in the tails. I will then now turn it over to Mr. Mueller with the Senate to discuss the Senate position.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mueller. Please identify yourself and take it away.
Sure. Thank you, members. Conference committee, I want to appreciate you making accommodations for me as I got to jump over to another conference committee after this. So going through the Senate position, the Senate basically has 3 items where it adds additional general fund money for a total of $50 million one time. The first is on line 13, the Workforce Home Ownership Program. The Senate adds $10 million in fiscal year 23 to the $250,000 base. And again, that is a one-time additional appropriation. The Senate has 2 new items. First on line 39, it's the home ownership investment grants for a total of $35 million one time. This is a new program that focuses on new homes in the state, and it runs the program through the community development financial institutions. And there's some more information on that item in section 4 of Article 5. The next item that the Senate has is line 40, the targeted loan pool. The Senate has $5 million and this money would go through the Build Wealth program. And would target about 4,500 new homes in the metropolitan area. So that's it for the general fund items from the Senate. Again, there's $50 million of new general fund spending added to the existing appropriations, and there's no tails. The last 2 items on the spreadsheet I want to point out on the Senate side is on lines 74 and 75. It's on the bottom of the spreadsheet. The Senate makes 2 allocations within the Housing Finance Agency's Pool 3 or the Housing Affordability Fund. The first one is a $10 million Manufactured Home Park Revolving Loan Fund. This is somewhat similar to the program that the House has for home parks, and this would help homeowners, manufactured park home associations purchase the manufactured parks. And again, this is a revolving loan fund within Pool 3. The second item that the Senate has within the Pool 3 Housing Affordability Fund is a grant program for high-rise buildings to install sprinklers that do not already have them. This is targeted for buildings that are 7 stories or more and are owned by nonprofits. So that's all that there is on the Senate side of as far as the appropriations in the spreadsheet.
Okay. Thank you very much. We can move on to Justin Cope and Mary Mullen. Please present yourself to the committee and carry on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Justin Cope of House Research. I'll be walking through the side-by-side prepared by the Revisor's Office staff and skipping over the appropriations section since those were covered by Mr. Mueller and Mr. Harney. So we'll be starting on page R7, sections 1 and 2 both expand eligibility to the Homework Starts with Home program. At present, that program only provides assistance to unaccompanied youth and to families with children eligible for pre-K through grade 12. This will be expanding eligibility to include all families with minor children. Section, and I should say all these provisions until I pass things off with Mr. Stang are house only. On R10, Section 3 would establish a lead safe homes grant program, which would fund lead testing and lead remediation in rental housing. Section 4 modifies authorized uses of housing infrastructure bonds and establishes new criteria to prioritize housing infrastructure bond projects that are affordable to families at or below 50% of area median income. It would also require multifamily buildings funded by housing infrastructure bonds to include both accessible and sensory accessible units. Section 5 on page R13 would authorize the issuance of $400 million in housing infrastructure bonds. Section 6 would establish the community stabilization program, which Mr. Harney discussed. This would be used to fund and preserve naturally occurring affordable housing. Section 7, beginning on page R14, would be to fund, would be establishing a strengthening supportive housing model grant program, which would be used to improve supportive housing for families that are homeless or had previously been homeless. Section 8, which begins on page R15. This would be allowing affordability covenants to last more than 30 years under general law, with some exceptions. Covenants affecting real property are limited to lasting only 30 years. This would allow covenants that were created by a government entity related to affordable housing to last more than 30 years. Section 9, beginning on page R16, would establish a stable housing mediation grant program to fund mediation services primarily revolving around landlord-tenant issues. Section 10, beginning on page R17, that would be a first-generation home buyers down payment assistance fund that would be established by this bill. Section 11 on page R19 would be establishing a manufactured home park cooperative purchase program, which would be used to assist manufactured home park residents in forming cooperatives to purchase their manufactured home parks or to purchase them as resident-owned communities. And Section 12, beginning on page R19, would establish a local housing trust fund grant program to provide matching grants to funding for local housing trust funds. And with that, I'd pass things over to Mr. Stang from Senate Council.
Good afternoon, members. I'm going to go through a series of Senate-only provisions now, starting on page R20, and then turn it back over to Mr. Cope a little bit later. Section 1 deals with limits on the governor's executive powers in the future related to evictions. And what it says is the governor can only delay or prohibit evictions for 30 days in the future. And after that, he's got to come back to the legislature for approval. Section 2 deals with limitations on residential development. It basically does two things. Number one, it does not allow a municipality to require a planned unit development agreement or PUD agreement if the development complies with existing city zoning ordinances. And secondly, it cannot, the municipality is prohibited from conditioning approval of a building permit on the use of specific aesthetic designs or materials. That's the second thing that it does. Section 5, I'm on page R21 now. Requires some reporting, additional reporting on the rehabilitation loan program. Section 11 requires some additional reporting on the manufactured Home Park Infrastructure Grant Program. Continuing down, section 14, on the bottom of page R21, moving to page R22, requires the agency to award points in all their programs in terms of their decision-making criteria based on how quickly a project can be constructed. Section 15 requires some reporting with respect to the challenge program. Section 6 says that when a contingency is provided in a grant award under the Workforce Housing Development Program, changes made to the project by a developer aren't considered a change in scope, and the grant must be funded under certain conditions there. Section 27 is additional reporting with respect to the Workforce Housing Development Program. Section 28, I'm on page R23 now, requires the agency to set up a program that offers mortgage financing and down payment assistance for purchasers of manufactured homes. Section 29, and it also is paired with a repealer later, section 36. This repeals the ability of a city to impose rent control after they were authorized to do so by the voters, and it is retroactive to November 1st of last year. R24, these deal with housing pool bond allocations under the State Bond Allocation Act. Currently, if there's several applications under the same priority and there's not enough funding for the projects, they're allocated randomly. This would require a preference be given to the project with the lowest cost per square foot. That's both section 30 and 31, different housing pools, but the same idea. Now I am down to section 32, which extends the time for the task force on shelter authorized last year or the last year's omnibus bill to issue its final report from August to December. Section 33, page R30, prohibits grant funds awarded by the Housing Finance Agency to be used to hire a lobbyist. Section 34 was a floor amendment by Senator Marty, and that requires a report, the Housing Finance Agency to complete a report regarding corporate entities and investment firms purchasing single-family homes in the state and converting them into rental housing, the effect on the housing market of that. Section 35 requires, on page R31, requires a comprehensive report by the Housing Finance Agency on rent control. I also already mentioned section 36, the repealer. Moving on to the R32, we finally have a section we agree on. That's changing the word insure to ensure. On page R32, there's a number of those that'll pop up, I think 5 or 6 of them. And back to a Senate-only provision on section 4 there on R32, increases the maximum loan amount under the rehabilitation grant program from $37,500 to $40,000. So that takes us to R33, and I believe Mr. Cope was going to pick it up again here.
So section 2 on page R33 is a house-only provision. This would allow rehabilitation loans issued by MHFA to be used to add or rehabilitate a detached accessory dwelling unit. Then on page R34, section 3 and section 6, section 3 of the House provision and section 6 of the Senate provision are the same. They would both allow funds issued by MHFA pursuant to Minnesota statutes chapter 462A to be issued to federally recognized Indian tribes or tribally designated housing entities. There's one difference with these provisions, which is that the House provision takes effect on August 1st of this year, where the Senate provision takes effect the day following final enactment. Section 4 and of the House bill and section 7 of the Senate bill are both similar provisions requiring MHFA to address housing disparities using the funds appropriated to it. The House provision, section 4, requires any program under 462A to serve households affected by housing disparities, while the Senate provision, section 7, requires homeownership programs to be used to narrow racial disparity gaps in homeownership. Section 5, 6, and 7 of the House bill and 8, 9, and 10 of the Senate bill, running from R34 through R35, both make the grammatical changes which Mr. Stang mentioned, which are to replace insure with ensure. And then beginning with, section 8 and section 8 of the House provision on R36 and section 12 of the Senate bill, both remove a requirement for county sponsorships for nonprofits seeking family homeless prevention and assistance grants. Section 9 of the House bill, section 13 of the Senate bill, again, both replace insure with ensure. Section 10 on R36 is a House-only provision. This would specify that the debt ceiling currently imposed on the agency only applies to general obligation bonds and not other bonds issued by the agency. On page R37, section 11 of the Housing bill and section 16 of the Senate bill would both authorize the MHFA to issue nonprofit housing bonds to refund previously issued nonprofit housing bonds when the debt service on the refunding bonds would be lower than the currently issued bonds. Section 12 of the House bill and section 17 of the Senate bill would require Minnesota Management and Budget to transfer the amount of money necessary to cover the debt service on refunding bonds. On refunding nonprofit housing bonds, Section 13, beginning on page R37, makes changes to the definition section of the housing infrastructure bond section in the MHFA chapter. This would be including changes to the definition of senior and adding a definition of senior household. And that was house only. On page R39, there's another house provision, house only provision. And this would be, this would be amending the use for senior housing to be consistent with the definition change, and would be also allowing the housing infrastructure bonds to be used to replace federally assisted rental housing. Page R40, section 15 of the House bill and section 18 of the Senate bill. Both of these authorize the MHFA to issue housing infrastructure bonds used to refund previously issued housing infrastructure bonds when the debt service on the new bonds would be lower than already existing bonds. Section 16 of the House provision and section 19 of the Senate provision and section 17 of the House provision and section 20 of the Senate provision on page R41 running through R43 would both require Minnesota Management and Budget to transfer the amount necessary to cover the debt service on those bonds to MHFA. Section 18 of the House section on page R43 and section 21 of the House section of the Senate section, on page R43 would both be making counties eligible for workforce and affordable homeownership development program grants. Then I would turn it over again to Mr. Stang.
Hello again. We're on section 22 on page R43. This is sender only provision. This section goes with the language you'll see in paragraph E in the next section and section 24 on the next page, but basically it expands in statute the workforce housing program to include owner occupied in addition to rental housing, and that's to make it consistent with a rider that's been carried in the appropriations bill for at least several cycles. R43 section 19 House and section 23 Senate. There's some more statutory changes to the workforce housing program. The Senate and House agree on adding federally recognized tribal reservations to eligible project areas for purposes of this program. But the House picked up a definitional change. If you'll see on line 80.18, changes metropolitan area to outside of metropolitan county for purposes of figuring out which cities are eligible, and the Senate did not pick that up. Page R44, I think those are conforming changes to, those are both bills are identical on that section, and that conforms to what I've already addressed. So we're down to section 21, the House side, page R44, and I believe Ms. Mullen was going to take it from here to the end.
Chair and members, this is Mary Mullen with the House Research Department. I'm going to walk through the landlord-tenant provisions beginning on R45 of the housing side-by-side, and these are house-only provisions. Sections 1 to 3 prohibit discrimination in housing against an individual who's receiving public assistance. Section 4, starting on R47, provides new guidelines on when the court may order a discretionary expungement on eviction action. And section 5 provides additional situations where the court can grant a mandatory expungement action. Section 6 at the top of R48 prohibits a landlord from imposing ongoing fees that don't relate to a service provided by the landlord and imposes a penalty for violating this section. Section 7 removes a provision from existing law that allows a tenancy at will to be terminated with only 14 days notice. Section 8 requires a landlord to provide heat in a residential tenancy at a minimum temperature of 68 degrees from October 1 to April 30th. Sections 9 and 10 restrict a landlord's entry into a residential unit to between the hours of 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. And it clarifies that the notice needs to be 24 hours before entry, and section 10 provides a new penalty for that provision. Section 11 on R49 allows a tenant to terminate a lease if the tenant requires assistance with daily living, meets the nursing care facility care criteria, or has a disability related to mental illness. Section 12 extends a temporary provision currently in law that prohibits a landlord from filing an eviction action or proceeding on an action for a tenant not paying the rent when the tenant has applied for rental assistance and is waiting for a determination on the assistance. Section 13 provides that prior to an eviction for non-payment of rent, a landlord must provide a notice to the tenant. This section also provides that an eviction action is not accessible to the public until the court has entered a final judgment in the case. Section 14 on R55 allows an unlawful exclusion case where a tenant has been locked out to be brought for the same filing fee as a conciliation court case. And sections 15, 16, and 17 all relate to emergency repair cases. Section 15 specifies the type of incidents that allow a tenant to petition for an emergency repair. Section 16 allows a tenant to petition for emergency relief in a case for an emergency repair. And section 17 allows the court to charge the same filing fee as a conciliation court matter. And that is the end of the housing pieces. And I believe we go on to broadband from here.
Okay, thanks. For broadband and ag, we've got Joe Harney, Hannah Grunwald, Colby Sullivan, and Laura Painter. Please take it away. I understand Joe Harney's first.
Chair Sundin, Chair Westrom, Ms. Connolly is going to be pulling up on the same spreadsheet from before, but jumping up to the top here. To orient members to what Ms. Grunwald and I will walk through, I'll be covering columns C and D, House File 4366, the second engrossment, Article 1 and 7, for the Minnesota Department of Agriculture first, and then I'll pass it over to Ms. Grunwald to walk through the Senate position in their articles. Starting on line 7, in fiscal year 23, there is a $2 million one-time appropriation for noxious weed grants. On line 8, there is a $100,000 appropriation for increased resources for USDA equivalent meat testing. $50,000 is added to the base each year thereafter. On line 9, there is $6,500,000 from the general fund in fiscal year 23 appropriated for Forever Green equipment and infrastructure. $1.5 million is added to the base from the general fund each year thereafter. On line 10, there's $9 million in fiscal year 23 from the general fund for cover crop development grants. It's a one-time appropriation. On line 11, there's $6,725,000 in fiscal year 23 for the Healthy Soil Program. It's a one-time appropriation. On line 12, there is a $2 million one-time appropriation from the general fund that I believe is more structured as a transfer to the pollinator research account. Again, $2 million in fiscal year 23. On line 13, regulate plastic coated fertilizer and plastic coated pesticide. $371,000 is appropriated from the general fund in fiscal year 23, and $358,000 is added to the base each year thereafter. On line 14, treated seed consumer guidance, $100,000 in fiscal year 23 from the general fund is appropriated. Line 15, food safety analysis, $425,000 from the general fund is appropriated in fiscal year 23. That's another one-time appropriation. On line 16, farmers market and direct marketing support, there is $1,250,000 from the general fund appropriated in fiscal year 23, another one-time appropriation. On line 17, there is a $10,000 one-time appropriation from the general fund for a regional food system report at the Department of Agriculture. On line 18, there is a general increase to agri grants from the general fund. That's $1,056,000 in fiscal year 23 and $142,000 each year in the tails. On line 19, there is $3 million in fiscal year 23 for agri bio incentive payments. $2 million from the general fund is added to the base each year thereafter. Line 20, agri livestock processing facility grants, $3 million one time from the general fund is appropriated in fiscal year 23. On line 21, agri farm business management, $300,000 is a one-time appropriation in fiscal year 23. On line 22, farm to school, there's an $800,000 appropriation in fiscal year 23, and that amount is added to the base each year thereafter. Now, these three next agri lines in brackets are written in the bill, and Mr. Sullivan can clarify this for you all when the side-by-side walkthrough happens, but these are bracketed to be less permissive, and as a result, dedicate these specific appropriations to be only used for the purposes stated in the rider. So they are not tabulated in the total appropriation, but rather a restatement of the total rider amount available. So line 23, farm to school, the new rider would be 1.6 million in the general fund in fiscal year 23 and each year thereafter. On line 24, 1 million for urban and youth agriculture in fiscal year 23, and then each year thereafter. And lastly, 1 million in fiscal year 23 for good food access program, and each year thereafter in the tails. To line 26, there is an additional $22,000 made available for the agricultural mental health specialist. That amount is added to the base in each year thereafter. On line 28 in the bill, there is a deletion of a one-time appropriation, and that creates a base adjustment on the spreadsheet here for $75,000 each fiscal year in the tails for the Turf Seed Council. On line 29, $2,600,000 in one-time general fund money is appropriated for emerging farmers. On line 30, $2 million is appropriated for information technology modernization at the department. That's a one-time appropriation. On line 31, there is in fiscal year 22, a $4.5 million appropriation for animal disease preparedness and response, the Ag Emergency Fund, of which on line 32, $1.5 million is appropriated for veterinary diagnostic laboratory. Line 33 is hunger relief for Second Harvest Heartland. $3 million in the general fund in fiscal year 23 is appropriated, and $1,350,000 is appropriated in fiscal year 24, and $1,300,000 is added to the base, in fiscal year 25. Moving to line 34, meat processing technical program, $500,000 from the general fund is appropriated in fiscal year 23, a one-time appropriation. Line 35, beginning farmer tax credit infrastructure, $140,000 is appropriated in fiscal year 23. $56,000 is added to the base in fiscal year 24, and the base for that appropriation is 0 in fiscal year 25. On line 36, a one-time appropriation for the Ag Innovation Campus of $1.5 million in fiscal year 23. Line 37, from the general fund, $100,000 appropriation for the aquaculture plan. On line 38, there is a $3 million appropriation for farm down payment assistance grants, and $1 million is added to the base each year thereafter. Line 39 is a $1 million appropriation in fiscal year 23 for heritage oilseed research. Line 40, meat processing training grants, $100,000 from the general fund is appropriated in fiscal year 23. Line 41, meat processing education grants, $500,000 is appropriated from the general fund in fiscal year 23, another one-time appropriation. And line 42 includes a $1 million one-time appropriation for the South St. Paul meat processing grants. And then Chair Sundin, Chair of Westrom, to round it out on the next page for the Department of Agriculture, there is a tracked general fund savings for the food handler and vending machine fee dedication. That's $3.6 million in fiscal year 23 and $7.2 million in fiscal year 24-25. Rounding out the total general fund appropriation in the House position for $53 million in the current biennium and $7.4 million in the next biennium. I'll now turn it over to Ms. Grunwald to discuss the Senate provisions.
Hello, Mr. Chair and members. For the record, my name is Hannah Grunwald. I'm fiscal staff with the Senate Council, and I'll be covering the Senate portions of House File 4366, Articles 1 and 2. So beginning on line 6, there's a Senate-only provision of $1 million in fiscal year 23, one-time funding for compensation to certain white-tailed deer farmers. And then next on line 9, there's an appropriation of $200,000 in fiscal year 23 for the Forever Green initiative. Line 10 shows a $50,000 one-time appropriation for cover crop development grants. And then jumping down to line 17, the Senate and House have the similar funding for this provision for the Regional Food System Report of $10,000 in fiscal year 23. Then on line 20, the Senate has an increase of $700,000 in fiscal year 23 for agri livestock processing facility grants. Then jumping down to line 27, there's a Senate-only provision of $50,000 in fiscal year 23 for a new Egg BMP grant program, which is established in Article 3 of the Senate bill. Then on line 29, there's a Senate provision for $30,000 in fiscal year $300,000 in fiscal year 23 for emerging farmers, specifically for preference to organizations that serve African-American immigrants and refugees and African-American populations. Then on line 31, the Senate has $500,000 in the first year for Ag Emergency Fund. Then on line 32, the Senate has $350,000 in the first year for the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory for equipment there. Then on line 36, the Senate has $500,000 in the first year for the Ag Innovation Campus. In line 37, the Senate has $10,000 in fiscal year 23 for the aquaculture plan. Then jumping down to line 40, the Senate has $30,000 in fiscal year 23 for meat processing training grants for reimbursements for those trainings. Then line 41, $1 million for meat processing education grants for secondary schools. And that wraps up the Senate side of the MDA, bringing the total for MDA on the Senate side to 4.7 million. Now I'll turn it back to Mr. Harney.
Chair Sundin, Chair Westrom, picking back up again on line 62, discussing the Agricultural Utilization and Research Institute appropriations in the House file. On line 63, there is a one-time $2 million appropriation from the general fund for facilities infrastructure. On line 64, there's $1 million one-time from the general fund in fiscal year 23 for lab equipment. And then on line 65, there is $400,000 added in the current biennium for cost of living adjustments at the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute. The total appropriation in the House position for the Institute is $3.4 million from the general fund in fiscal year 22-23 and $400,000 in the general fund in fiscal year 24-25. And I'll let Ms. Grunwald discuss the Senate position.
Mr. Chair and members, the only Senate provision under RE is $300,000 in fiscal year 23 for lab equipment. And overall, that brings the general fund total under the Senate side to $5 million in fiscal year 22 and 23. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Harney to discuss broadband.
Chair, members, the House position is to provide on line 71, $25 million in broadband development to be appropriated to the Deed Office of Broadband. That total then rounds out all of agricultural finance and broadband on the House side to be $81,400,000 in fiscal year 22-23 and $7.8 million in 24 and 25. I'll turn it over to Ms. Grunwald to discuss, I believe, the non-general fund expenditures at Deed that are tracked here.
Mr. Chair and members, on the Senate side, there's a few broadband provisions using federal dollars. You'll see on line 84, the Senate directs the Commissioner of Deed to appropriate the remaining capital projects funds of $110.7 million to go towards the border-to-border broadband program. And then on line 85, this is just to show a provision in Article 2, Article 2 of the Senate bill, which directs any infrastructure funds from the most recent federal infrastructure bill that are broadband related to go towards the Office of Broadband at Deed and to go towards the border-to-border broadband program. Then these last three lines, 86 through 88, show some direction on other programs that this federal funding can be used on. So first, starting with line 86, the lowered population density pilot program can use up to 15 million under either the Capital Projects Fund or the IIJA funds to go towards this pilot program. And then again, 15 million, up to 15 million can be used on a new broadband line extension program, which is established in Article 4, I believe, of the Senate side. We'll go into a little bit more detail on that later. And then line 88 shows up to 15 million of the federal funds can be used for a comprehensive statewide mapping. So overall, the Senate's position is spending 110.7 million in fiscal year 23. And then I should have mentioned for the infrastructure funds, we know that the state is getting at least 100 million, but there will be more determined by formula from the federal government with time. We're not sure what that amount is yet. And I believe that should wrap up at least the Senate side. The remaining sections of the spreadsheet show some transfers, and I'm not sure if Mr. Harney wants to cover the House non-general fund expenditures.
Chair, I think that does it for the House side.
Okay. We've got Colby Sullivan and Laura Painter available.
Do you want to take the questions for just the fiscal analysts first if they finish the spreadsheet?
It's general preference on that. You want to go ahead, Chair Hausman?
Well, I was just confused about the bracketed amounts, what the bracketed amounts indicate. In one section, it looks like they were a transfer out, but particularly, I guess this would be for the House fiscal analyst, line 32, the veterinary diagnostic laboratory, that's bracketed. What's the impact of the fact that it's bracketed?
Chair Sundin, Chair Hausman, the impact is that it is just of that $4.5 million. So it's not, it is showing that of the $4.5 million, 1.5 million is for veterinary diagnostic laboratory, but it's not being totaled in the calculation for the spending.
I see. Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay. Who's up next then?
This is Senator Draheim. I think I'm up next. If I could, Chair Sundin, just a question. In the House, I know they had some housing infrastructure bonds, and I don't see any tracking of that or the debt service. So did I miss that, or can someone explain where that is being captured?
Chair Sundin, Senator Draheim, the House bill authorizes the issuance of up to $400 million, but does not appropriate debt service to MMB to pay for the ongoing cost of the HIBs.
So the 224 million in debt service doesn't get captured anywhere?
The debt service is not tracked.
And I can just add to that, the agreement among leadership was that debt service would appear in the bonding bill. That was the leadership decision.
Is that, Chair Sundin, could we ask fiscal staff if that is customary not to track that debt service on HIBs?
Fiscal staff, would you like to weigh in on this?
Senator Draheim, I don't know about if it's customary. I can just speak to the mechanics of if it's not appropriated in the bill, then there's nothing to track for debt service. Since the language issuing the bonds is permissive itself, it does not, as a standalone item, require tracking on the spreadsheet because there's none appropriated for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Graham. Anything further?
No, I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you.
Okay. All right, moving on. We have Colby Sullivan. Did you want to weigh in?
Mr. Chair, if you're ready, I'll take over with a walkthrough of the agriculture appropriations side by side.
Take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair and conference committee members, my Senate counterpart, Laura Painter, is under the weather, so I will be doing the walkthrough myself. And I'll move pretty quickly through this side by side because the appropriations have already been covered by Mr. Harney and Ms. Grunwald, but there are a couple of important language differences just to flag for the conferees. The first one is on page R5. So both the House and the Senate would appropriate money for cover crop development grants, and the House would also require an annual report back to the House and Senate Ag, Finance, and Policy Committees. Ms. Conley's right on it there. It's on 6.16 to 6.23. The next difference is on page R7. Both the House at the bottom there, both the House and the Senate would appropriate $10,000 for a report by the Department of Agriculture regarding regional and local food systems. But the language is different, so the report would look a bit different depending on whether the conferees went with the House or Senate language. The House language is focused on an interim report on a statewide cooperative partnership for local and regional markets, whereas the Senate language is more general and applies to the state of regional and local food systems in Minnesota. So then the next change to highlight for conferees is on page R9. This is the existing rider for the Agri or Agricultural Growth, Research and Innovation Program at the Department of Agriculture. You'll see on line 11.15 on the left or House side, the House adds the words plant-based foods to clarify that businesses producing plant-based foods are eligible for value-added grants from the Department of Agriculture under the Agri program. The next difference then is on page R10, 12.15. The House has additional language that it's adding to the rider for the bioeconomy incentive program or bioincentive program at the Department of Agriculture. In addition to adding additional money in the second year, the House says that that money is for new incentive payments as well as paying claims not otherwise paid. And that matches up with some House policy language that I'll walk through a bit later. Then moving on to R12, Mr. Harney did a good job of describing the changes in the House position to the farm to school, good food access, and urban agriculture components of the Agri program. And you'll see that language here on page R12. Basically, these three subsets of the Agri program go from optional uses of funding that the Department of Agriculture may fund, but only up to a certain amount, to mandatory allocations from Agri. The House also increases the level of funding for farm to school from up to $800,000 to $1.6 million per year. For urban agriculture from up to $600,000 to mandatory $1 million. And good food access from an optional up to $450,000 to $1 million. And then if we can go back to 14 really quickly, page R12, line 14.34. This was in Representative Lippert's, I forget the House file number right now, but on line 14.34, the House would authorize the Department of Agriculture to reimburse not only schools, but also child care providers for purchases from local farmers. That's new. So jumping ahead to page R14, both the House and the Senate would pick up the governor's recommendation to change the recipient of the grant from the department for farmer and rural mental health. Both the House and the Senate would change the recipient from Minnesota State system to the Region 5 Development Commission. But the House also on 17.9 to 17.12 would allow the commission to use up to 6.5% of the appropriation for administration. There isn't an administration allowance in the Senate language. And jumping, if we could, way ahead to R20. Both the House and the Senate would appropriate money for grants to organizations that provide technical and culturally appropriate services to emerging farmers. As Ms. Grunwald noted, the Senate language on 24.4 and on 24.6 would require the Department of Agriculture to give preference to organizations that serve African immigrants and refugees and African-American populations. While on the House side, the House language, this is from Representative Vang's House File 3264, lines 12 to 14 there. The money could also be used to help emerging farmers pay for up to 2 years of coverage under the USDA's Micro Farm Risk Management Program. And then also on R20 on the Senate side, lines 23.28. Both the House and the Senate would allocate additional money to the agricultural emergency account, a portion of which on the House side would be for the vet diagnostic lab. And the Senate language specifies that this money is for the same purposes as in Chapter 47, the standalone bill that the House and Senate passed and the governor signed in April that provided $1 million to the same account for purposes of responding to highly pathogenic avian influenza. So the Senate language just clarifies that this money is for that same purpose. And if we go ahead to page R22, both the House and the Senate have money for the Ag Innovation Campus in Crookston, but the Senate requires a report back to the House and Senate. It's 22.24 to 22.30. Both the House and the Senate require an aquaculture plan or appropriate money for an aquaculture plan. The Senate plan would be due by 2023, February 15th, and the House a year later, 2024. And then finally, one more difference on R23 on the Senate side. Both the House and the Senate would provide money for grants to secondary career and technical education programs offering instruction in meat cutting and butchery, and the Senate would also require a report with several specified components. It's the language that Ms. Conley has highlighted there with the cursor. That's it for this side by side, Mr. Chair and members. If there aren't any questions, I'll move on to the ag statutory changes, which is in a separate side by side document. And I'll also note at this point too that Ms. Painter and I last week, or actually on the 3rd, you can't see it because it's blurred out, but we put together a separate document that complements this revisor side by side, and it identifies which provisions are the same, which are similar, and which are different, and how they differ. So that's available to conferees to help you distinguish between the House and Senate positions. So then moving into this agriculture statutory changes, House Article 2, Senate Article 3. The first section is House only. This was recommended by the governor as part of this year's supplemental agriculture finance bill. It would modify the ag emergency account that we talked about recently and would receive additional funding from both the House and the Senate. The House picks up the governor's recommendation to modify eligible uses. It's hard to see because of the highlighting here, but on 29.6 and 29.8, the House would say the money may be used not only to respond to ag emergencies, but also to prepare for them. Then dropping down, we have two similar sections between the House and the Senate. This was part of the governor's recommendations this year. It was also in the House and Representative Vang's 4111 to reestablish cooperative grant program with the Department of Ag. The language is similar, except on page R2 at the top, the highlighted language on the Senate side. The Senate would require a dollar for dollar match for these grants and also prohibit the Department of Agriculture from using state dollars when awarding the grants. Then next, we have a number of sections that are the same. These were recommended by the administration. They're changes to the Agricultural Best Management Practices Loan Program. So those are House Sections 3, Senate Section 3, House and Senate Sections 4. On R3, House and Senate Sections 5. And onto R4, House and Senate sections, well, those are the same provisions. So, and then if we go to R4, those loans issued to borrower, House Section 6, loans issued to borrower, and Senate Section 6. These are similar except for the one change that, or difference that Ms. Painter and I characterize as technical. That's on 33.16 on the Senate side. You see the Senate strikes the word multiple from current law. Otherwise, that section is also the same. It has to do, again, with the Ag BMP loan program and how the department administers that particular program. On the bottom of R4, then, House Section 7 and Senate Section 7 are the final Ag BMP sections, and they're also the same. And then, so moving on to page R5, we have House-only language, House Sections 8, 9, and 10. These were all recommended by the governor as part of this year's governor's proposal for agriculture finance. They would all modify the existing agri-livestock investment grant program by decreasing the max grant amount from $50,000 to $25,000, and also by lifting a requirement that the Department of Agriculture must add any unfunded applications to a waiting list. and consider those when additional funding becomes available. That is on page R6 at the top, the end of House Section 10. Then we have a House-only section, Section 11, Farm Down Payment Assistance Grants. This is from Representative Vang's House File 3263. The Department of Agriculture would award grants to eligible farmers who are purchasing their first farm to help offset the cost of the down payment required by the lender or seller of that land. And then on the bottom of R6, we have two sections that the reviser put next to one another because they do have some similarities in their purpose. On the House side, Section 12, Soil Health Financial Assistance Program. This was recommended by the governor this year. And the Department of Agriculture would provide financial assistance to local governments, private sector providers, or farmers for specialized equipment and technology necessary to implement and sustain soil health practices. On the Senate side, Senate Section 2 would create there's an existing Ag BMP loan program. This would be an Ag BMP grant program. And it would also be targeted towards improving soil health. So you see that Subdivision 2, the Department of Agriculture would develop and regularly update a state soil health management plan. And then there's quite a bit of language on the Senate side about the components of that plan. And then you'll see the Senate's eligible projects in Subdivision 3. So those are the purposes for which the department could award these Ag BMP grants. And then there are a couple other provisions on the Senate side about eligibility and funding limitations. Those go through the top of page R8. So then moving on to page R9, R8, at the top we have House only sections these are from Representative Hansen's House File 3751. And what these sections do, there are several sections on this topic, essentially define and prohibit the use of plastic-coated fertilizers and plastic-coated pesticides in the state of Minnesota, effective on January 1st, 2025 for non-agricultural pesticides and January 1st, 2026 for agricultural pesticides. So that's House Sections 13 and 14. And then in the middle of those sections, we have a change to the pollinator habitat and research account. It's House Section 15 from Representative Morrison's House File 3077. You can see on 36.21 that under current law, that dedicated account would expire on July 1st of this year. The House language would extend that by 3 years. As Mr. Harney noted, it would also provide additional funding to the account, and then it would change the name of the account and expand a bit on the eligible uses by adding the new clause 1 on 36.18. So then after that section dealing with pollinators, we're back to the plastic-coated pesticide and fertilizer language that continues through the top of page R9. And then we have after that, a Senate-only section that I'll cover in Ms. Painter's absence. This is a change to the Agricultural Chemical Response and Reimbursement Account program administered by the Department of Agriculture. Under current law, the maximum payment or reimbursement per spill is 80% of $350,000. You can see the Senate would increase that, stage the increase over a number of years. So that it would go from $350,000 to $425,000 for 2 years, and then up to $500,000 maximum for 2 more years. And after that, I would go up to $575,000 per incident, or actually 80% of that amount. Then we're back to House only language on page R10. These are a number of sections from Representative Hansen's House File 766 that would prohibit under the state Minnesota seed law the use or sale as food, feed, oil, or ethanol feedstock any seed that's treated or covered with a neonicotinoid pesticide. Then the last section on that topic is on the top of page R11. Section 22, this requires the Department of Agriculture in consultation with the PCA to develop and maintain consumer guidance regarding the proper use and disposal of seed treated with neonicotinoid pesticide. And then paragraph B in that section requires retailers of such seed to post the department's guidance in a conspicuous location. After that, we have a series of related sections, House Sections 23, 24, and 25. Mr. Harney mentioned the fiscal impact of the dedication of food handler license fees and penalties and vending machine inspection fees. The language to implement that is here on this page. Under current law, the Department of Agriculture deposits these revenues in the general fund. With this change, they would instead deposit them into dedicated accounts in the agriculture fund. And that same amount of money then would be appropriated statutorily back to the department for its duties to oversee food handlers and vending machines in the state. And Section 25 is what I believe just to be a corresponding change to reflect that dedication in the prior sections. Bottom of R11, House only Section 26, membership. This is from Representative Nelson's House File 3878 as amended. What the House language would do is it would add an additional member to the existing Food Safety and Defense Task Force that advises the Department of Agriculture. And that new member on line 39.28 would have to be a person knowledgeable in cybersecurity. At the bottom of R12, we begin House and Senate language that pertains to farm cervidae or white-tailed deer farms in the state of Minnesota. The House language is Section 27, mandatory registration from Representative Hansen's House File 3273. This language effectively implements a moratorium on new deer farms in the state of Minnesota, while allowing existing registrants to transfer on a one-time basis their herd and their registration to a family member who lives in the state if the Board of Animal Health first verifies that the herd is free from chronic wasting disease and the person pays a one-time fee of $500 for that transfer. We have the Senate Farm Cervidae section, Senate only on R13. The first section, importation, Senate Section 9. This says once there is a live animal chronic wasting disease test that is validated by the federal government, from that point on, then a person can only import white-tailed deer into the state of Minnesota if they have tested negative immediately prior to importation. And Section 10, then, this is a Senate provision that modifies current law regarding the Department of Natural Resources and the Board of Animal Health's concurrent authority to regulate white-tailed deer. And on 35.31 to 35.32, see the Senate language would specify that neither the DNR nor the Board of Animal Health could issue an emergency order that restricts the movement of farmed white-tailed deer without the concurrence of the other agency. And that would be effective the day following final enactment.
Okay.
Moving on to page R14. Senate only, Section 11. This has to do with agricultural preserves in counties that have chosen to implement ag preserves. And in general, just ag is the allowed use within an ag preserve, but the Senate would provide that solar energy systems that have the capacity of 1 megawatt or less could also be allowed in ag preserves going forward. Then on the R14, House Section 28 is the first of several sections that make the same change to the bio-incentive program administered by the Department of Ag. The language looks a lot longer than it really is because there are 3 components of the bio-incentive program: advanced biofuels, renewable chemicals, and biomass thermal energy. And there are corresponding changes to each of those statutes on the House side. But this is from Representative Stevenson's House File 3913. You can see on 40.28, currently the eligibility window under current law for the bio-incentive program is for facilities that begin production by June 30th of 2025. The House language would shrink that window so that the plant would need to begin production by the end of this year. And then the language you can see on the bottom of R14 essentially says that producers who receive pro rata or partial payments for eligible production due to a shortage of necessary funding provided to the department for purposes of this program, those producers could reapply for that deficiency payment or the difference between the amount received and the amount that was specified by law for eligible production. So, and that would be, you can see on the next page, 41.14, 41.15. These changes to each of the bio incentive program components would be effective retroactive to January 1st of 2020 and would apply to claims that were filed after that date. So with that, we can skip ahead quite a bit to page R19. Top of page R19 is also related to the bio incentive program. This was not in Representative Stevenson's bill, but this was in the House language that was in conference committee last year. And it requires for the bio incentive program that eligible facilities that receive payments from the Department of Agriculture must provide additional information to the department. The department must report that same information to the legislature. So you could see there would be 10 new clauses of required information for each producer, their business structure. They would need to provide all financial assistance received from all grantors, equity hiring goals and their progress in achieving those goals, etc. So then get to the bottom of page R19. These sections are the same between the House and the Senate. They were recommended by the governor and modified by both bodies, and they modified the department's administration of the Oriented Strand Board Production Incentive Program. On R20 then, House Section 36, this was recommended by the governor and picked up by the House that the Department of Agriculture could use up to 6.5% of the statutory appropriation for the Oriented Strand Board Production Incentive for the department's administrative costs. Then we have a Senate only provision on R20, Senate Section 13. This language would require the Rural Finance Authority to make a decision on a completed loan application within 10 business days. And back to the House side, House Section 37, recommended by the governor this year. It's a change to eligibility under current law for the Rural Finance Authority's Disaster Recovery Loan Program. R21, both the House and the Senate would change the requirements for licensed grain buyers in the state of Minnesota. In the House, the language is from Representative Anderson's House File 2969. There are a couple of differences on 48.21. Under current law, certain small grain buyers who purchase with cash or cash equivalents are exempt from the requirement to post a bond if they purchase no more than $100,000 in grain per year. The House would increase that threshold to $250,000. You can see, if you slide across to the Senate side, the Senate would do away with that sales threshold altogether and provide that any grain buyer, regardless of how much they purchase, if they purchase with cash or cash equivalents, they would no longer be required to post a bond, effective the day following final enactment. Similar changes on the following page, page R22. This again has to do with licensed grain buyers and existing requirements that they provide financial statements to the Department of Agriculture on 49.13, 49.17. Both the House and the Senate increase the purchase threshold for audited or reviewed financial statements. The difference is on 49.27, similar to the bond requirement. The House increases the cash buyer threshold to $250,000 or less, and the Senate eliminates that purchase threshold altogether. So grain buyers, regardless of size, purchase with cash or cash equivalents, would no longer be required to provide financial statements to the Department of Agriculture. Towards the end on R23, we have a Senate only section, section 16. This has to do with the regulated animals law that generally prohibits possession of primates, large cats and bears, with a few exemptions. The Senate would expand the exemption. See on 40.6 under current law, the prohibitions do not apply to institutions accredited by the American Zoo and Aquarium Association. And on 40.16, the Senate would add a new exemption for USDA licensed exhibitors of regulated animals that house animals owned by institutions accredited by the American Zoo and Aquarium Association. And that change would be effective the day following final enactment. And then finally, we just have on the House side, a technical change to account for the new House definitions for plastic coated fertilizers and pesticides. And with that, members, we've reached the end of the ag policy side by side.
Okay, thank you, staff. That's a terrific presentation, a lot of information to absorb. We can hear from the agencies now.
This is Senator Dietzig. I have a question.
Oh,
Quick
please go
question.
ahead. Senator Dietz, please.
Thank you, sorry. On going back to R21, this is the grain buyer issue on the threshold. So is this just for the, we're removing the threshold here for, on the bonds so the House is increasing the threshold, is the Senate, and I'm not on the Ag Committee in the Senate, so I apologize. Is the Senate removing the bond for everybody or just the small grain buyers?
Mr. Chair and Senator Dietz, I think you characterized it correctly there. I think the House is increasing the threshold for the small cash buyers. So currently only up to $100,000 in purchases per year are exempt from the bond requirement. The House would increase that to 250,000 per year. So more grain buyers who purchase with cash would be exempt. And the Senate would just say, regardless of annual purchase amount, cash buyers are exempt from the requirement to post a bond.
Okay, and then I have, thank you. One other question I missed, I was getting a beep here on R20, section 36. What is that relating to again?
Mr. Chair and Senator Dietz, House Section 36 on R20 relates to the Oriented Strand Board Production Incentive Program that was created in last year's tax bill.
And why is it in here?
Mr. Chair and Senator Dietz, it's administered by the Department of Agriculture as part of the bio incentive kind of umbrella program.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, we can move on to Commissioner Tom Peterson, Department of Ag. Commissioner Peterson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for the record, my name is Tom Peterson. I serve as a commissioner for the Minnesota Department of Ag. We also have our Deputy Commissioner, Andrea Vobel, and our Government Relations Director, Michelle Medina, on as well. As we go through the committee process, we'll also make technical experts available at any time. I want to first thank you for your work on both bills, the House and the Senate. I think there's a lot of similarities in both bills. And I would also reference the letter that our committee has provided to the committee members. And so I will just keep this brief because most of our comments and everything are in that letter. One thing, as we look at this and we look at putting our budget together, I just wanted to remind those of you that aren't on the Ag Committee that we looked at this. The governor used a public process. We used a portal where people could present ideas and present suggestions. We looked at, as we not necessarily are coming out of COVID, but learning to live with COVID and kind of coming out of it, what are some of the things that we could do to have an impact on our food system? And so we received a lot of ideas through that public portal and then put them into legislation. We wanted a strong agricultural package. Our state had a healthy budget surplus, and we looked at what are some things that we could do one time to have an impact on that budget. So you'll see things that I think really rose to the top were the funding that is in the House for noxious weeds. Palmer amaranth's a very serious issue in our state. We've had several high-profile fines this past year. Forever Green is something that both bodies are familiar with, and glad to see that that's in, although different numbers, and we'll see that House usually having more in their bill, but not universally. That's an important piece that we see is really bringing along the third cropping system. The soil health provisions that are the governor had 10 million in his bill, and we have more both in the House and Senate to some degree, and I think that's something that is just super important. I want to thank both of you bodies for putting in money for the ag emergency. When we crafted this and we had 1.5 million in our budget earlier in session, we hadn't anticipated the outbreak of high path avian influenza. We are right now at 71 premises and almost 3 million birds. I will say it's kind of interesting just to update the committee. Many of it has slowed down, knock on wood some, but we are seeing the last several cases have been in backyard flocks. And so we want to continue that. But a lot of work goes on in surveillance, mapping, and then also cleaning as some of those first barns now are coming out of quarantine. We anticipate now that our ask is somewhere around $3 million. We appreciate the legislature moving $1 million, but that $1 million compared to with what we also had in our fund equaled about 1.3 million. And last I checked, we had allocated money for 1.4 million. So we definitely need money before the end of session. It's just a question of it's in this bill or in standalone or the drought bill. However, legislators would like to handle that, but we anticipate that dollar to continue our mapping, our staffing needs, and our equipment needs to be somewhere around 3 million. That could be less if we have fewer cases, but it's an important piece, and I appreciate updating on that. I also think funding for hunger one time is important. We see a ask in the House too, and the governor's budget for a second Harvest Heartland, the food group, and those initiatives as we just look at our food system changing in COVID, and also the $1.5 million we had in our budget. Both bodies have money for meat processing, just continues something the bodies are very familiar with. You know, as we look at that and we just put out the money that you had allocated last year. And I think we had 4 times the ask on the 750,000 we had. So we know the need is there. I know all of you that work in rural Minnesota and have customers in the cities that are looking to buy meat know that farmers still have up to a year wait for that process. A couple other things I just want to hit are, you know, with a surplus, I think it's helpful sometimes if we can address issues that are one-time needs. And so we have asked for IT modernization. All of you, whether you're a metro area legislator or outstate legislator, will have, you know, constituents that want to work with us, want to do things more through our website and our online. And so that takes time, it takes money, and we really need to do that. So, that is a really important piece and something that we could and hopefully fix and address with one-time surplus dollars. I also, one thing that I think is very important that we fix is our farmer and rural mental health. It's a small part of the budget, but it's really an important piece that we had a issue with one of the counselors. And if we can fix that piece and come together on that, that would be really helpful to the agency and also to farmers as we work on it. Finally, I want to highlight the food handler dedication fees. I think is something that would be really helpful to our agency in dedicating some of those dollars and stabilizing our budget as we go forward. There's many other things that I could talk about, but I'm going to leave it at that. Mr. Chair, I look forward to working with both chairs. You know, in my 3 years as commissioner, I think we've had very good ag bills that have had very, very strong support. So look forward to working with you, and thank you.
Mr. Chair, you're muted.
Excuse me, that was my best speech of the year. Okay, just have a few other items to touch on, and then we're going to touch on broadband as well before we close out. So next up, we have Commissioner Jennifer Ho from Minnesota Housing. Commissioner, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Sundin, Chairman Westrom, Chair Hausman, Chair Draheim. I've got lots of fabulous chairs here today, and great to be with you. I just want to thank all of you for your willingness to serve on this important conference committee. Ag, Housing, and Broadband back together again. But it's also great to just note that we do have standalone finance committees for housing for the first time ever in both the House and the Senate, and that's been very exciting. This has given housing the attention that it really deserves over the course of the last 2 sessions, and since every Minnesotan deserves a place to call home, and because of the strong bipartisan tradition in both agriculture and housing, I'm optimistic about the prospects of reaching a strong agreement in the remaining time that we have together this session. I especially just want to thank Chair Draheim and Chair Hausman and their staff for leading engaging hearings on a broad range of topics over the course of the session, and for the deep personal commitment that each of you has for solving Minnesota's biggest housing challenges. It took years to create the challenges that we have in housing as a state in both rental and home ownership. And it's going to take years of sustained investment from both the public and the private sector in order to address these challenges. The budget surplus provides a generational opportunity to invest in programs that meet a variety of Minnesota's housing needs, both near term and into the future. The governor recognized this and recommended historic ongoing investments in everything from homelessness prevention and rental to affordable home ownership development in both existing programs and in new initiatives. We worked with community partners and stakeholders to develop our supplemental budget, focusing especially on those who earn the least. Now more than ever is a time to go big. And I'd like to just really briefly provide thoughts on both positions as we begin the work of reaching a compromise. As to the House position, there's a significant amount of overlap between the House position and the governor's recommendations in both policy and budget items. I am especially glad to see the strong ongoing funding commitments made in many of the same agency programs as were recommended by the governor. And I'm also grateful that our agency technical bill was incorporated in its entirety and that nearly all the governor's tenant protection recommendations were incorporated. As to the Senate position, I want to thank Chair Draheim for carrying the Senate Housing Omnibus Finance and Policy Bill. The areas of overlap in priorities between this bill and the governor's budget recommendations are encouraging. It's clear that we share the priorities of working toward closing racial disparities in home ownership by preserving and developing new opportunities. I will say one-time funding is helpful, but ongoing commitments would signal to developers that we have an intent to carry this work forward for years to come. I'm grateful for several policy provisions from the agency's technical policy bill that were included in your bill. While some changes were merely grammatical, others will actually expand and clarify eligibility, make our processes easier, and potentially save the state money on the debt that Minnesota Housing issues for housing infrastructure bonds. I'm encouraged to see the Senate's commitment to ensuring that our programs function as intended and are responsive to our partners' needs and to their inputs. Just in closing, we have an opportunity for us to confront our state's housing challenges head on and in a comprehensive way. We're not dealing with something as broken as we see in housing markets on the coasts, but it's not hard to see how we would move from where we are now to that place if we don't do something big and sustained in order to intervene with the resources that we have. So I'm really hopeful that given that we have these shared priorities, that we will have an opportunity to find compromises where we have differences today. I really do believe that our state's health, education, economy, and safety depend on getting housing right. So I look forward to working with you in the remaining days and don't want to take up too much of your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next up, we have Mr. Scogan from the Agriculture Utilization Research Institute. Welcome, Mr. Scogan, to the committee. Please identify yourself and take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair Sundin, Chair Westrom, I am Dan Scogan. I am Director of Government and Industry Relations for the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute, or AURI. AURI came to the legislative session this year with 5 priorities, 3 of which are still in play in this conference committee. I want to thank the conferees for their work here today and in the next few days as they put this bill together. One thing is these different entities come into one bill. We have several conferees who are not serving on the ag committees these days. And so if I could take just a minute to get you up to speed on what our requests are and how it will affect our clients. AURI, created by the legislature some 30 years ago, tasked with bringing new streams of revenue into the state of Minnesota through value-added agricultural products and processes. We do it with technical assistance. And we have, even through the pandemic, over 150 projects going on at any one time with your constituents and with our clients around the state of Minnesota. The provisions that we brought forward here in 2022 that are still in play here in the conference committee include a $2 million allocation for a facilities update in Crookston and Waseca, especially in Waseca, where we have grown in our co-products lab to the point that we now have 2 labs in Waseca. We outgrew the lab that we had, and for the last 2 or 3 years, we've been working out of 2 different locations, which, as you might understand, is not only unsafe at times, but also not very efficient. And so this $2 million appropriation would help us get back under one roof in the city of Waseca. And then, of course, we have an interest in having a footprint at the Ag Innovation Campus as that moves forward in the Crookston area as well. In Waseca right now, we are exploring several possibilities and options, but if funds would become available, it would accelerate our ability to secure a footprint to provide an increasing level of both technical and commercialization assistance for food and agriculture businesses for decades to come out of the Waseca laboratory, and would also reduce our annual rent costs by some $80,000 a year. One of the other provisions that is still available in both the House and Senate, we have asked for $1 million for equipment in upgrades to replace at both our labs in Waseca, Marshall, and Crookston. There is a $300,000 appropriation in the Senate side, the $1 million appropriation on the House side. Every year, AURI budgets some money for equipment needs, but every year we come up a little short on what we need. This ask is going to help us do a catch-up, if you would, for equipment that we need for technical assistance in the ag and food industry. The equipment would be focusing on assisting companies who advance protein opportunities for food and feed processes and products, fermentation opportunities that are starting to present themselves, and biomass processing, including drying and pelleting. And then lastly, those first 2 are one-time appropriations, and I think I concur with Commissioner Peterson in that with the surplus that the state is looking at right now, while we want to be prudent, this is an opportunity to take care of some of the needs that are out there, and AURI certainly has 2 that are still in play here in this ag bill. And then the third one is a cost of living adjustment. AURI has not had a cost of living adjustment from the state in over 3 years. We want to be competitive. We want to offer good salaries, good benefits for our clients, or for our staff and for our scientists, and all the way down to our office staff as well. So this would be an ongoing, this one does have tails, and I think that was pointed out when we went through the bill, but it's a $200,000 a year addition to our appropriation. And yeah, you're going to get a lot of good ideas from a lot of different areas, but AURI has served the state well. We still get about an 80-to-1 return on investment when we work with clients and help them bring their ideas to commercialization. And I have also added a letter that you can review. I've sent each of you an email reviewing our requests this year. I want to thank you for your time. Certainly we'll stand for questions, and good luck as you work through the details of this compromise and this ag bill. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Scogan. We have a few minutes for questions before we move on to the broadband issue. From the committee, any questions to either commissioners or Mr. Scogan? Going once, going twice.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Westrom, please.
Mr. Chair, just to the Ag Commissioner, if you could comment on some of the provisions I understand in the House bill deal with slow release of nitrogen and banning some of those products. Can you just tell us where the Department of Ag is on some of those positions, please?
Commissioner Peterson, please.
Mr. Chairman, we do have some concerns about that. You know, I do appreciate that when that was put together, it was put out several years. I think we're looking at what the usage is of it right now. And my first thought on this was too that if we were ever going to have a bill like this, that it would have to be out several years as they're planning on that. But it's a real small piece, and my understanding is that that there's multiple impacts of this too and everything. So it's something that we could visit with if you want to visit with that more, and we could have somebody on that could go into more detail of that. But we do have some concerns about the impact of that would have in the long term.
Okay, Senator Westrom, anything further?
No, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Peterson. I've been receiving several inquiries and questions, as well as just input from different farm groups and farmers that have some great concern with that. And I just wanted to touch on that while we had some questions. So thank you, Mr. Chair. We need to do some more study on that from the Senate perspective too. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any further questions from the group? Okay, hearing none, can we move on? Oh,
Hi,
Senator Graham.
thank you, Chair Sundin. I just checked with my leadership, and we don't know of any agreement on the HIBS bonding that has been set out, that both bodies agreed not to track the debt service or the HIBS. So I just want to make sure for the record that there is no Senate House agreement and not to show the debt service for HIBS, which is 224 million, if my math is right. So any comment on that?
That's correct. That is only a House leadership direction to us. My understanding is, and I can clarify this further if their thoughts have changed, that they wanted us to have it reflected in both the capital investment bill and the housing bill, but the debt service would be accommodated in the bonding bill. And then, and this is for research folks, my understanding is we have language that clearly states, obviously, it only happens once. If it's in two bills, it doesn't happen twice. It only happens once, and that language is accommodated in that way. So I can get some more clarity on that, Senator Graham, and see if they're further along in their decision making about where that's going to be. But the idea is, yes, we will certainly track it, but it will be tracked in the bonding bill.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Chair Hausman. Okay, any further questions?
Mr. Chair.
Oh, Senator Pratt, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, thanks for that explanation, Representative Hausman. But I think it would be helpful, as we're going forward, whether if we're going to dual track the bonds, then we should probably dual track the tails tracking. And that would be my request, Mr. Chair, that the documentation be consistent with the way both the House and the Senate do it. And if we're going to dual track the issuance, then we should dual track the payment. Thank you.
I wonder if Mr. Harney has a comment about that. He appeared, and I don't know if that means he has further comment.
Chair Hausman, yeah, sorry, Chair Sundin, Chair Hausman, Senator Pratt, we can surely provide an estimate of the debt service in the tails as to the issuance authorized in the bill. Again, since the bill itself does not say this amount is appropriated, it's not prudent for me to track it on the spreadsheet, but I understand and can provide that information, Senator Pratt.
Thank you. Anything further on this? Okay, thanks for your comments. Last call for questions. Okay, can we revert to the broadband issue? Mr. Sullivan, please.
Mr. Chair and members, Ms. Grunwald and I will quickly walk through the side-by-side for the broadband articles in the House and Senate bills. The House just has the 3 sections that you see here on page R1. House Section 1 would increase the maximum grant amount for a single project under the border-to-border broadband development grant program at the Department of Employment and Economic Development to $10 million. It's currently at $5 million. It would also provide that the grant award may fund up to 75% of the total project cost. It's 50% under current law. That's effective the day following final enactment. Section 2 would require the Office of Broadband Development to report back to the legislature on the effect of these changes to the percentage of total cost and the maximum grants amount, what impact this has on the number and amount of grants awarded by the Office for Broadband Projects. And then Section 3 is simply the House's $25 million general fund allocation for border-to-border broadband grants. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to Ms. Grunwald.
Mr. Chair and members, on the Senate side, Article 2, the broadband appropriations, Section 1 has some technical changes to the Chapter 10 law from 2021 for special session. And in addition to the technical changes, it also requires the money to be spent by December 31st, 2026, which matches the federal deadline. And the next few sections I covered a little bit in the spreadsheet. I'll just review them quickly here. Section 2 is establishing the pilot program for unserved and underserved populations, and grants can be up to $5 million, covering up to 75% of the total cost of the project, and up to $15 million of federal broadband money can be spent for this purpose. And then Section 3 of Article 2 is the direction for the Commissioner of Deed to apply for the remaining $110.7 million in capital projects funds to be used for the Office of Broadband Border-to-Border Broadband Program. So then on the next page, Section 4 directs any funding from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to go towards the Office of Broadband Border-to-Border Program, if those funds, any broadband funds from that infrastructure bill. And then Section 5 directs up to $15 million of federal broadband money to be spent towards a new broadband line extension program, which is established in the next article. And then finally, Section 6 allows up to $15 million to be used for comprehensive statewide mapping if this is deemed an eligible expense under federal law. So then Article 4, there's 3 sections for broadband policy. The first section runs from R3 to R5. And under this section, the broadband line extension program is established where grants are awarded under a reverse auction process. And these grants can be up to $25,000 per line extension project. And then Section 2 on page R5 allows the border-to-border account already in statute to be used for this new line extension program. And then on R6, the last section in the Senate's broadband policy article is to allow broadband service providers to use existing utility easements for any broadband installation. And that wraps up the Senate side of broadband policy.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any questions on the broadband issue? Okay, plenty of work to do there too. All right, hearing no other concerns about the broadband, would any members of the conference committee like to comment before we wrap up for today? Crickets.
Sorry, Mr. President.
Senator Giesecke,
Yep.
please.
Thank you. I just was wondering and curious on like, do we have any, I know it's early, it's the first day, I appreciate being on this conference committee. Do we have any thoughts on the next, like the next schedule, the next discussion? There's a lot of same and similars. Any thoughts on how we're moving forward? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I will say that that'll be up to the fellow that's got his hand up next here. Senator Westrom, please.
Mr. Chair, and I guess to Senator Dietzich and the rest of the conference committee. My thought is I'm going to gather with our staff on the Senate side after following through the bill here. I think we need to get more familiar with the same and similar areas that we would maybe, be the first areas we'd start talking through, trying to have more common ground and understand where each body is coming from, as well as try to dissect a little better provisions we have that the Senate or House doesn't have, and vice versa, provisions the House has. And so I guess, Mr. Chair, since you and I probably wouldn't hurt to talk maybe later this afternoon yet, and just come up with the best ways to exchange some proposals or some ideas of where we go with initial adoption of same and similar language, whether that's as early as tomorrow or Wednesday, or not. I guess I can't quite say yet. I need to kind of digest this a little bit better about myself, but thinking that's where some of our first steps would be, and then we need to just figure out on all the parts that are different, how what the appetite is in the Senate Conference Committee members for House provisions, and what the appetite for House provision or Senate provisions would be for House. And I think that might be some of our discussions we need to have, and then bring the conference committee back together when there's a point of maybe a lot of some agreement or some fruitful provisions that we've kind of see us both being able to move forward with. That'd be kind of my thoughts at this point in time. And Chair Sundin, if you're available, maybe later this afternoon we could still try to touch base and just come up with some ideas and plans. And Chair Draheim and Chair Hausman, I would look to them to take more of the leads on the housing sides, housing provisions in the two bills. And if some of those discussions can happen between those chairs and other members of those respective committees, and we do that more on the ag and the broadband side of things, Chair Sundin, I think that's where I see us moving forward the quickest. So that can probably happen in just discussions between the different members and some trading some proposals back and forth might be fruitful to get started with sooner than later, to try to see how much common ground we can find as quick as possible. Those will be some of my thoughts, Chair Sundin. I'd look for comments from you at some point here as we close for your thoughts, and we can try to advance from there. So Senator Dietzich, I hope that answers some of your questions. Some of it I'm not quite yet sure if our next meeting is tomorrow yet, or how soon we regroup, but we'll certainly keep you posted as soon as we can.
Certainly. Thank you, Senator Westrom. Yes, the gavel is yours. I'm willing to meet at any point, see if we can smooth out some of the edges and come to agreement on a few things. And I do have full trust and confidence in Chair Hausman to do the best with the housing issue. So I see she's got her hand up. Chair Hausman, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did just want to follow up on Senator Diedzich's question, because my understanding is tomorrow the Senate would have the gavel. And so if we were going to meet tomorrow, it would be Representative Chair Westrom who would gavel in. What I'm not sure about, do we have agreement on the process? Does the gavel move back and forth each day, so that on Wednesday it would again be Chair Sundin, in your hands? Do we have clarity on those rules?
That is my understanding. Thank you, Chair Hausman. Senator Westrom, your hand is still up.
Oh,
Comment?
I just forgot to drop it, but
Okay.
Senator or Chair Sundin, that's my understanding too as well. It would alternate back and forth, but I know we're gonna have a couple long days on this on the Senate floor the next couple as well. So, but as you know, as soon as we have some meaningful, areas we can find agreement on, I think it's helpful to get together at the same time, getting together and then not having some things talked through and have as much vetted, working with staff, working with other conferees on the committee. I think sometimes more fruitful time can be spent just honing in on the areas we really want to get agreement on, or see that there's a pathway for agreement on. And so let's see how quick we can work on that, both housing members as well as our ag committee members, because there's not a lot of time either way, but we need to digest this. There are several different provisions, and if the House can get that, work on that as much as, and we will here in the Senate, to understand the difference in provisions from the ag bill, the housing bills, the broadband bills. I think that'd be helpful. And then maybe, Mr. Chair, we can even try to solicit some proposals back and forth as quick as possible, because that sometimes gives everybody at least a marker and a cornerstone to know where we can find the agreement the easiest, the quickest, and what areas might take more discussions and work to have agreement on, or maybe there's just no pathway on some things. So I think the sooner we can get to that discussion, the more fruitful we have, and actual meaningful work to get back together for. So why don't we try to connect, Chair Sundin is later this afternoon and talk through some of those ideas. So
it sounds like a terrific idea, and I hope the housing folks are going to do the similar, pick similar track, and we'll be reporting back at the next called meeting, be it tomorrow or the next day. So with that, thank you very much, Senator Westrom and other chairs. Appreciate your attention today, and we're adjourned. Thank you.